Earth broke ties with the Galactic Council and left the alien universe in panic. The room was already watching me when I walked in. 412 civilizations, seated in a chamber carved out of a moon. 12,000 years of galactic history pressed into every polished surface. The air smelled like ozone and something sweet, whatever the Varath used in their atmospheric systems. It made humans slightly dizzy if we breathed it too long. I had never asked whether that was intentional. I set my briefcase on the edge of the human delegates' table. It was the smallest table in the room. That had always been the joke. Earth's table was the kind you put near the exit so you could pretend someone was still invited while making it easy for them to leave. Today, I was going to use that door. My name is Zara Voss. I have been Earth's delegate to the Galactic Council for 9 years. I have sat in this room through trade negotiations I was not allowed to vote on, through military agreements that used our solar corridor without asking, and through 31 formal sessions in which the word human was used the way you use the word inconvenience. I had written detailed reports home every month. I had played the game with patience and with care. Today was the last day I would do any of that. The Grand Arbiter, a tall, slow-moving creature from the Varath species, called the session to order. Its voice came through the translation rings as something close to a low bell. Every delegate in the room wore one. Mine had been a gift from the council on my first day. A silver ring, elegant, precise. A leash with good manners. The matter on the agenda was Item 7C. I had read the document 40 times. I could have recited it backwards. Item 7C was a proposal to reclassify Earth as a Class 2 emerging species. In plain language, that meant this. Humanity would lose its sovereign seat. Earth would be assigned a guardian civilization. The Keth sovereignty had already volunteered to manage our trade, our FTL corridor access, and our external communications. We would not be consulted on decisions affecting our own star system. We would be, in the careful language of the proposal, guided toward stability. The justification, printed in neat formal script across 4 pages, came down to one sentence buried on page 3. Humans are emotionally ungovernable and pose a long-term risk to council coherence. The vote was not going to be close. I had checked the numbers. 378 delegates would vote yes. 14 would abstain. 20 would vote no, mostly out of pity, or because their own civilizations had been in similar positions and still carried the memory. I knew all of this before I sat down. The arbiter asked for any statements before the vote. 3 delegates spoke. The Vithrani representative used the word volatile 4 times. The Keth delegate spoke warmly about their long history of mentoring developing civilizations, which was the diplomatic way of saying they had absorbed 6 of them. A small, quiet species called the Myerth said nothing, but their delegate looked at me with something that might have been an apology. I did not speak during the statements. I sat still, and I breathed the ozone air, and I thought about a document I had memorized 11 years ago, long before I ever set foot on Varath Prime. A document written by a legal historian named Owen Burke, who had spent 30 years reading every line of the Galactic Council's founding charter, and had found, buried in an appendix, a single clause that had never been used in 12,000 years of galactic governance. Clause 9, Section 4, Paragraph 7. Any sovereign species holding a full delegate seat may, at any time, invoke the right of complete withdrawal, removing itself from all council jurisdiction, all council protections, and all council obligations, effective immediately upon the verbal declaration of the seated delegate in open session. 12,000 years, not once, because the clause assumed that no civilization would ever choose to give up the protection of the council. The council was the structure. Leaving it meant standing alone in a galaxy full of powers that could reach you in a moment. The arbiter called the vote. 378 yes, 16 abstentions, 18 no. The vote passed. The arbiter announced the result in that low bell voice, and moved immediately to the next item on the agenda, as if the removal of a species' sovereignty was a small administrative task, as if Earth was a footnote that had now been neatly crossed out. I stood up. The room did not go quiet at first. Delegates were already murmuring, already moving on. Then the movement stilled, one table at a time, as they noticed I was standing. You did not stand after a vote unless you were filing a formal objection, and the council rules were very specific about when objections were permitted. This was not one of those times. The arbiter looked at me. Its large pale eyes carried no readable expression. I reached into my briefcase and removed a single printed page. I set it flat on the table in front of me, smoothed it once with my hand, and looked up at the room. In accordance with Clause 9, Section 4, Paragraph 7 of the founding charter of this council, I said, my voice steady and clear through every translation ring in the room, the sovereign delegate of Earth formally invokes the right of complete withdrawal, effective at this moment in open session before all seated delegates. The chamber went absolutely silent. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the delegate's seal, a small bronze disc engraved with the council emblem, the symbol of Earth's membership. I set it on the table. I did not throw it. I did not make a speech. I placed it gently, the way you set down something you no longer need. Then I picked up my briefcase, turned my back on 412 civilizations, and walked to the door. Nobody spoke, not one voice, not one question. The only sound was my footsteps on the polished floor, and they echoed in that enormous chamber like a countdown. The door opened. I walked through it. On the shuttle back to the transit station, my aide, a young man named Owen Carter, no relation to the historian, handed me a glass of water and looked at me with wide eyes. He had been watching the session feed from the shuttle. He had seen everything. "Did that just work?" he asked. "We'll find out in about 72 hours, I said. I drank the water. I looked out the viewport at the stars. Below us, Verath Prime was already growing smaller, its carved moon chamber a tiny bright point among the lights of the docking rings. Behind me, in that room, 412 civilizations were about to realize that the smallest table in the room had also been holding up a corner of the floor. I had left, the floor was still there. For now, my comm unit buzzed. Earth's Secretary General Calvin Marsh was on the line. He had been waiting. "It's done," I said before he could speak. "Start the clock." There was a short silence on the line. Then Calvin exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried 11 years of planning in it. "All protocols are live," he said. "The relay nodes went dark 3 minutes ago." I nodded to myself and closed the comm channel. The shuttle accelerated into the dark. Somewhere behind us, in the grandest chamber ever built by sentient beings, the galactic net was already beginning to stutter. 9 seconds after I closed that comm channel, the first system alert fired in a monitoring room on Keth Central Station. An engineer named Priya Akafer, not Keth, but one of the contracted human technicians who quietly staffed about 30% of the galaxy's communication infrastructure, watched the alert appear on her screen, checked the source code, and then calmly poured herself a cup of coffee. She had been briefed 6 months ago. She knew exactly what the alert meant, and she knew better than to fix it. The alert was this: Earth Relay Node 7 had gone offline. That did not sound dramatic. It was not supposed to. But Earth Relay Node 7 sat at the center of a communication web that had grown quietly over 40 years, threaded through the galaxy the way roots grow under a lawn, invisible, until you try to pull up a section and find everything connected. Humans had built infrastructure. That was what we did. It was not political. It was not strategic, not in the beginning. Earth had joined the Council as a minor species and had been assigned the unglamorous work that no advanced civilization wanted to do, maintaining relay stations, calibrating FTL navigation beacons, running data routing systems across the outer transit corridors. It was low-status work. It was exactly the kind of thing you gave to a species you considered temporary. We had done the work. We had done it thoroughly, and we had kept doing it for decades, and somewhere along the way, the galaxy had stopped noticing that we were the ones doing it. There were 11 primary relay nodes, all owned and operated by Earth. There were 463 secondary relay stations, also ours. There were navigation beacon arrays in 9 of the 12 most traveled FTL corridors, calibrated by human engineers and running on Earth-developed firmware. And there was the Lattice, a quiet, elegant data routing architecture designed by a team in Auckland 40 years ago that had become, without any announcement, the backbone of long-range communication across 47 star systems. When the right of withdrawal was invoked, every one of these systems received a single encrypted signal, not a shutdown command, something subtler, a permissions revocation, like changing the lock on a door you had always left open for courtesy. The galaxy could still talk. Most of it could. Short-range communication, system-local networks, species-specific infrastructure, all of that still worked. What stopped working was the kind of communication you needed when you wanted to talk to someone on the other side of the galaxy in under a day. The kind of communication that held empires together. The kind that let a fleet coordinate across 100 light years, or that let a colony on the edge of nowhere receive medical data from its home system without a 2-week delay. That kind stopped working. I was back on Earth when the reports started coming in. I had slept for 14 hours, my first real sleep in 6 weeks, and woken to find Owen Carter sitting at the kitchen table of my apartment in Auckland with a tablet full of alerts and a look on his face that mixed concern with something very close to amazement. "The Vithrani Financial Exchange is down," he said, setting the tablet in front of me. "They use Node 4 for real-time cross-system pricing. Without it, they can't confirm trade values across their outer colonies. Their markets opened this morning, and within 40 minutes they had to suspend trading." I poured coffee and sat across from him. "What else?" "The Myerth Medical Relay is running at 12% capacity. Their outer system clinics depend on the Lattice to receive diagnostic data from their central hospitals. Right now, a clinic on Myerth 7 is operating on its own judgment because it can't reach anyone." That one I did not like. I had anticipated it. We had prepared contingency offers for medical and emergency systems. Earth had no interest in causing harm to innocent people on distant worlds. But the Council needed to feel the weight of what they had treated as a minor administrative inconvenience before those offers would mean anything. "The Keth?" I asked. Owen almost smiled. "Their colonial fleet is currently sitting at waypoint 9 trying to figure out why their navigation synchronization has stopped updating. They're not lost, but they're not moving either. Fleet navigation in that corridor depends on our beacon calibration. Without it, jumping to high-precision coordinates becomes a significant risk." I drank my coffee. The Keth sovereignty, the civilization that had volunteered so warmly to guide humanity, operated the largest colonial fleet in the known galaxy. 1,400 ships, a military and economic engine that had been expanding for 2 centuries. They needed our beacons the way a deep-sea diver needs the line back to the surface. They had never asked about the line. They had assumed it would always be there. Calvin Marsh called at midday. He was in Geneva, and he looked tired in the way that people who have been managing a crisis for 72 hours straight look tired, but his voice was clear and controlled. "First official contact from the Council came in an hour ago," he said. "Formal request for dialogue, transmitted on the emergency channel, which still works because we left it open intentionally. Language measured, the arbiter signed it personally. They used the phrase mutual benefit 3 times. Mutual benefit. 48 hours ago they had voted to remove Earth's sovereignty without asking us a single question. Now they wanted to discuss mutual benefit. I thought about the founding charter, 12,000 years old, written by civilizations that had built something genuinely remarkable, a structure of laws that had prevented total galactic conflict for longer than most species had existed. I had respect for what the Council was at its origin. What it had become was something different, something that had grown comfortable with its own authority, that had begun confusing stability with fairness and order with goodness. "Don't respond yet," I said. Calvin nodded. "I had a feeling you'd say that." "Send the packet instead." The packet was a data file, 11 years of work by a team of analysts, auditors, and engineers. It was a complete, detailed, annotated record of every system Earth operated on behalf of the galactic community, every dependency those systems supported, and a precise calculation of what the ongoing disruption was costing, hour by hour, in economic loss, communication delay, and operational risk, across every affected civilization. No demands, no conditions, no threats, just numbers, just the truth laid out with the clean precision of people who had spent years being told they were not serious enough to be taken seriously. The packet went out on the emergency channel at 1400 hours. Owen found me standing on the balcony of my apartment an hour later, watching the harbor. Auckland was calm. The city was calm. The whole planet was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already made a decision and are simply waiting for the consequences to arrive. "The Vithrani ambassador is requesting a personal channel with you," he said. "Not yet. The Myerth have offered an independent statement of support. They're calling it a declaration of sympathetic observation. That's a start. And the Keth have sent 3 separate messages in the last 2 hours. The first was firm. The second was less firm. The third used the word request." I looked at the harbor. "Give it another day," I said. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, "You knew this would work. You knew before you ever walked into that chamber." I turned and looked at him. He was 26 years old. He had grown up in a world that had always been the smallest seat in the room. He had never known a version of Earth that the galaxy took seriously. "I knew it was possible," I said. "Whether it would work depended on one thing." "What thing?" "Whether the galaxy would look at the numbers honestly." I looked back at the harbor. Most beings, when they see honest numbers, can't ignore them. That's true whether you're human, Keth, Vithrani, or anything else. The universe runs on math. We just finally handed them the full equation. Below us, the harbor moved quietly in the afternoon light. Somewhere across the galaxy, a fleet sat still at a waypoint. Markets were suspended. Medical relays ran at a fraction of their capacity. The most powerful governing body in the known universe was rereading a data packet and slowly, reluctantly, understanding a thing it had never wanted to admit. The smallest table in the room had been holding up quite a lot. Day 3 came, and the Keth sent a fleet. I found out the same way everyone on Earth found out, through the standard news feed, which picked up the Council's public broadcast. 14 warships, 8 species represented in the combined crew. The Council had called it an enforcement presence, not a hostile action, technically, just a demonstration of collective authority, a way of saying that the right of complete withdrawal did not mean what I thought it meant. Owen was in my office when the broadcast came through. He set down his coffee and looked at me. "Fleet is 12 hours from the Sol entry corridor," he said. 14 ships, and the Council broadcast is framing it as a routine enforcement measure. They used the word voluntary compliance. I read the broadcast text twice. It was careful language, designed to make an armed fleet moving toward Earth sound like a polite administrative follow-up. The Council had been writing careful language for 12,000 years. They were very good at it. I stood up and reached for my jacket. "Get me a transit shuttle," I said. Owen stared at me. "To where?" "The waypoint. I'm going to meet them." He did not say anything for 3 seconds. Then, "You want to go to the fleet, personally, in a shuttle. One shuttle, no escort, no weapons." Zara. The moment I send anything that looks like a counterforce, this becomes a confrontation. I don't want a confrontation. I want a conversation. I pulled on my jacket and picked up a single briefcase, the same one I had carried into the Grand Conclave. "Get the shuttle ready." The transit to the waypoint took 4 hours. I spent most of it reading. Owen had insisted on coming, which I had allowed. He sat across from me and watched me read and did not speak for the first 2 hours, which I appreciated. The fleet was waiting at the entry corridor to the Sol system. 14 ships arranged in a formal arc, a display of presence rather than a battle formation. I could see the design signatures of 6 different species in the hull configurations. The lead vessel was Keth-built, long, angular, efficient-looking in the way that Keth architecture always was, functional without being cold. Their admiral was a being named Gret, and I had read Gret's file 3 times on the journey over. Gret had never lost an engagement. Gret had also, according to the same file, twice negotiated peacefully out of conflicts that his superiors had expected to turn violent. There was a note in the file from a Keth intelligence analyst. Subject prefers resolution, engages force only when resolution is demonstrably unavailable. That note was why I had come alone. I opened a comm channel on the Council emergency frequency as our shuttle crossed the midpoint between Earth and the fleet. "This is Zara Voss, former delegate of Earth, now operating as a private citizen of a non-member world. I am requesting permission to board the lead vessel for a direct conversation with Fleet Admiral Gret. I am unarmed. I am alone except for one aide. I have no authority and I am not here to negotiate." I paused. "I just want to show him something." There was a long silence, then the channel crackled. "Permission granted." The voice was Gret's own, deeper than I expected, measured, docking bay 4. Owen looked at me. "You're not here to negotiate. What are you here to do?" "Show him the numbers," I said. Gret was taller than I expected. Most Keth were. Their homeworld had lower gravity, and their bodies reflected millennia of adapting to open spaces. He met me in the docking bay personally, which told me something about how he understood the gravity of what was happening. Beside him stood 2 aides and a council legal observer, a small being from a species I did not recognize. There were no weapons visible, another sign. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. I got the sense that he was doing the same thing I had done on the journey over, reading the person in front of him and deciding how to proceed. "You came alone," he said through his translation ring. "You noticed," I said. "I noticed," he tilted his head slightly. "Why?" "Because I'm not here to match your force. I don't have force. I'm here because I think you are the kind of person who can look at a problem honestly, and I have something honest to show you." He considered that, then he gestured toward a corridor. "Walk with me." We walked. His aides followed at a distance. Owen stayed with the shuttle, which Gret had not objected to. Gret led me to a briefing room, a clean, spare space with a single table and a display screen on the far wall. He sat across from me. He folded his hands on the table. His face was patient and careful. I opened my briefcase and removed a single data card. I slid it across the table to him. "Everything Earth operates on behalf of the galaxy," I said. "Every relay node, every beacon, every routing system. And beside each one, the name of every civilization that depends on it and what happens to that civilization, specifically, exactly, system by system, if we choose not to restore it." Gret looked at the card. He did not pick it up immediately. "You are saying this is leverage," he said. "I am saying it is information," I said. "What you do with it is your decision." He picked up the card and inserted it into the room's display terminal. The screen filled with data, a scrolling architecture of dependencies, trade routes, medical relays, fleet navigation systems, colonial communication networks, species names in every column, numbers beside them that translated into something more than economics, populations, sick people waiting for diagnostic data, colonies that had not heard from their home systems in 4 days. I watched Gret's face as he read. His expression did not change dramatically. It shifted. It was subtle, a slight tension around the jaw, a stillness in the eyes, the expression of someone encountering a truth they had not been prepared for. He read for 11 minutes, I counted. "The Myerth medical relay," he said finally, without looking away from the screen. "You left it at 12%. "We left all medical and emergency systems partially operational," I said. "Earth does not want to cause harm to civilians on worlds that had nothing to do with the Council's vote. But 12% is not enough to function. It is enough to illustrate the dependency." Gret was quiet. "The Council voted to reclassify Earth as a ward civilization," I said. "They did it without asking us a single question about what we wanted, without asking whether their assessment of us was accurate, without reviewing what Earth actually contributed to the systems they depend on." I kept my voice level. "They looked at us and saw the smallest table in the room. They did not look at what the table was attached to." Gret sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the way that beings across many species do when they are processing something difficult. "If I were to complete this enforcement action," he said, "what happens?" "Nothing dramatic. You arrive at Earth. You issue the Council's compliance order. Earth declines to comply. You cannot force compliance without physically occupying our world, which the Council Charter does not authorize and which you personally would not choose to do, based on everything I know about your record." I looked at him steadily. "And while all of that is happening, the relay nodes remain dark. The lattice stays locked. The navigation beacons for the outer corridors stay uncalibrated. Every day this continues, the cost multiplies. And if I withdraw, then you and I are the two people who made it possible for a conversation to happen instead of a conflict." I leaned forward slightly. "Admiral Gret, I am not asking you to agree with Earth. I am not asking you to take our side. I am asking you to see the situation as it actually is, and to take the action that prevents the most harm." He looked at the data screen for a long time. Then he reached out and pressed the ship's internal comm panel on the wall beside him. "All ships," he said, "disengage from formation, prepare for withdrawal." A pause. "Navigation, plot return to Keth Central Station." The response came back in seconds. Acknowledgement from 14 ships. Gret looked at me. His face was unreadable but not unfriendly. "I will report to the Council that enforcement was not viable," he said. "I will include the data you have shown me in my report." "Thank you," I said. "Do not thank me," he said quietly. "Understand that what comes next will not be simple. There are those on the Council who will not accept the numbers the way I have. There are those who will look at this situation and choose escalation regardless of the cost." He looked at me directly. "You have created a crisis, Delegate Voss. Be certain you have a solution prepared." I stood and picked up my briefcase. "I do," I said. The shuttle ride back to Earth was quiet. Owen sat across from me as the fleet behind us turned and began to move away, one by one, until the view screen showed only stars. "You knew he would listen," Owen said. "I hoped he would," I said. "There is a difference." Owen looked out at the stars. "What comes next?" I thought about what Gret had said, that the conflict was not over, that there were those who would not look at the numbers honestly, who would find a way to reframe what had happened as disobedience rather than information. He was right. There would be harder conversations ahead. There would be pressure, and there would be figures in the Council who saw Earth's withdrawal not as a reasonable act of a civilization pushed past its limits, but as a problem to be solved by increasing force until compliance arrived. We were past the point where compliance was possible. We were at the beginning of something entirely different. "Next comes the table," I said. Owen looked at me. We walked away from their table, I said. Now we build a new one, and we invite everyone who has ever sat at the small seats. The shuttle crossed into Earth's solar corridor. The navigation systems updated automatically, our beacons, our frequencies, our home. Far behind us, 14 ships moved through the dark toward their own home, carrying a report that was going to change something in the halls of the most powerful institution in the galaxy. Change was slow, but it had started. The meeting was held in deep space. No station, no planet, a neutral point between three star systems, chosen precisely because it belonged to no one. The location had been proposed by a Vithrani diplomat named Clara Holt, which surprised most people, because the Vithrani had been among the loudest voices calling for Earth's reclassification. Clara had, apparently, done a great deal of thinking in the 2 weeks since the financial exchange suspended trading. She had read the data packet. She had read it 3 times, she told me later. And then she had sat in her office for a full afternoon before calling for a summit. There were 7 representatives at the table, 7 out of 412 council members. But these 7 spoke for civilizations that, between them, represented roughly 60% of the council's actual authority, the economies, the military capacity, the political weight. If these 7 moved, the rest would follow or fracture. Clara was there. So was a quiet, compact being from the Myerth, the species whose medical relay we had left at 12%. His name was Finn, and he had been a council delegate for 30 years, and he barely spoke during the entire meeting, but everything he said mattered. There was a Keth representative, not Gret, but a senior diplomat named Helen Osai, who had been Gret's superior and who had clearly been absorbing everything from his report for the past 10 days. 2 smaller civilizations, the Sareth and the Edenval, sent delegates I had not met before but whose positions I had studied. A collective civilization known only as the Breen, who communicated through layered signal patterns that my translation ring handled in real time. And one being I had specifically not expected, a Verath senior arbiter, not the Grand Arbiter, but one of the 12 senior arbiters who held the interpretive authority over the founding charter. His name was Salareth. He was very old, and he had requested to attend. I had come alone. 1 shuttle, Owen at the controls, no aides inside the meeting room. My briefcase, that was everything. The space station where we met was barely a station, more a platform, 8 rooms and a life support system, anchored at a gravitational midpoint with no particular history and no particular loyalty. The conference room had a circular table. Everyone at it had insisted on circular, and the symbolism was not lost on anyone. There was no formal agenda. That had been another condition I had set when the back-channel conversations first reached me 3 days after the fleet withdrew. No scripted agenda, no formal procedure, no voting, just a conversation between 7 representatives who were willing to be honest about what they were seeing. Clara spoke first. She was direct in a way that I had not expected. "Let me be clear about why I am here," she said, her translation ring carrying her voice smoothly across the table. "The Vithrani hegemony voted for Earth's reclassification. I voted for it personally. I believe the Council's assessment was sound." She paused. "The last 2 weeks have demonstrated that our assessment was entirely wrong, not just about Earth's capabilities, but about the nature of the relationship Earth had with the rest of the Council. We treated a foundation as if it were a decoration, and when it was removed, we discovered what it was actually holding up." No one spoke, she continued. "The question is not how to restore the previous arrangement. The previous arrangement was built on a misunderstanding. The question is what an honest arrangement would look like." I had expected defensiveness. The opening that Clara offered instead was so direct that it took me a moment to adjust. "I appreciate that," I said, "and I want to be equally honest." I looked around the table, 7 faces, 7 sets of eyes in varying physiologies, all of them watching me with careful attention. Earth did not walk away from the Council because we wanted to. We walked away because the council told us, formally and by vote, that we had no right to stay as equals. We used the only legal mechanism available, but let me be clear about what we actually want. I set my briefcase on the table. I did not open it yet. We do not want a better seat at the old table, I said. We do not want a formal apology, though one might be appropriate eventually. We do not want the council to acknowledge that humans are impressive or powerful or worthy of respect. We want something much simpler and much harder. Finn from the Myerth looked up at me. His eyes were dark and attentive. We want the council, or whatever replaces it, to ask a different question, I said. For 12,000 years the council has asked, what does each civilization need from the galaxy? How do we manage the smaller ones? How do we keep the larger ones in line? How do we maintain stability? I looked at Salareth. He was watching me with an expression I could not read. That question creates the system we have, a hierarchy, a management structure. Some civilizations at the large tables, most at the small ones, the smallest at the tables by the exit. I opened my briefcase and removed a document, a printed copy, which I had brought because physical documents were harder to accidentally lose than data files, and because there was something clarifying about holding paper in your hands. The question we want to ask instead is this: what does the galaxy need from itself? I set the document on the table. It was 140 pages. It had been written by a team of 46 people, historians, economists, legal scholars, and engineers, who had spent 11 years preparing for this meeting, while I spent those same years sitting at the smallest table in the largest room and watching and learning. What is in that document, I said, is a proposal for a new framework, a coalition of sovereign voices. Every civilization holds equal standing. No classification system, no Class 1 or Class 2, no guardian structures, no managed dependencies. Infrastructure is shared under open contract, maintained by whoever is willing and capable, compensated fairly, subject to transparent audit. Decisions are made by consensus, where possible, by weighted deliberation where necessary, and by the foundational principle that no civilization has the right to remove another's sovereignty simply because it is smaller or younger or different in temperament. The room was quiet. Salareth, who had not spoken since introductions, set his long pale hands flat on the table. You are describing the replacement of the council, he said, not as an accusation, as an observation. I am describing an evolution, I said. The council does not have to disappear. It can continue as an institution. But if it continues as the institution it currently is, it will do so without Earth's infrastructure, and the civilizations who choose a better model will eventually outgrow it. Helen from the Keth leaned forward slightly. The Keth sovereignty cannot simply abandon 12,000 years of institutional relationship. I understand that, I said. I am not asking anyone to abandon anything overnight. I am asking 7 people in a room to honestly assess whether the structure they defend still serves the purpose it was built for, or whether it has become something that serves its largest members at the expense of its smallest ones. I looked at her directly. Admiral Gret looked at the data packet and chose honesty over procedure. I am asking the same thing of everyone at this table. The name landed. Helen's expression shifted. Gret filed his report with my office, she said. I read it 4 times. A pause. He recommended engagement over enforcement. He has never made that recommendation before in 30 years of service. Because he had never encountered a situation where the honest numbers pointed so clearly toward engagement, I said. Another silence. This one felt different from the earlier ones. It felt like thinking. Clara spoke again. The document you have placed on the table, the coalition proposal, is this final, or is this an opening position? It is a framework, I said. Every detail in it is negotiable. The principles underlying it are not. And if we negotiate, if we engage with this honestly, what happens to the systems Earth controls in the meantime? Medical and emergency systems return to full capacity within 24 hours of a formal commitment to dialogue, I said. Communication relays are restored on a rolling schedule tied to progress. Full restoration when the coalition charter is signed. Clara nodded slowly. The Edenval delegate, who had been silent, raised a hand, their species' signal for wishing to speak. I represent a civilization that has been Class 2 for 400 years, he said. His voice through the translation ring was careful and precise. We have never had a full vote. We have been guided, which means, in practice, that we have been told what our guidance requires, and that our disagreement with that guidance has never mattered. He looked at me. If this framework becomes real, if equal standing is genuine, and not another system of management in different language, my civilization would support it. It will be genuine, I said, because the framework makes it structurally impossible for it to be otherwise. The audit systems, the open infrastructure contracts, the consensus requirements, they are not aspirational language. They are mechanisms. Salareth spoke again. I have read the founding charter of this council many times, he said. I was one of the scholars who reinterpreted it in the Fourth Era. I know every clause, including the one you invoked. He was quiet for a moment. I came to this meeting because I wanted to meet the being who read Clause 9, Section 4, Paragraph 7, and understood what it actually meant. Owen Burke read it first, I said. He spent 30 years on it. But you understood why it was there, Salareth said. It was placed in the charter by the original authors as a safeguard, a reminder that membership in the council should be chosen freely, not compelled. It had never been invoked because every civilization that might have used it had been told, over time, that it was too dangerous to be alone. He looked at me steadily. You decided the danger of staying was greater. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. I will observe this process, he said, officially as an arbiter, unofficially as a being who has spent a long time watching an institution drift from its founding purpose and has not known how to correct it. He paused. I do not know if your framework will succeed, but I believe it is asking the right question. That was more than I had expected from him. I thanked him and meant it. The meeting continued for 6 hours. We did not reach an agreement that day. We reached something better, a genuine exchange. A room full of beings willing to look at a document and argue about it honestly and specifically, pointing at individual clauses, raising practical concerns, asking questions that were not rhetorical. Helen asked about the Keth's existing treaty obligations. Clara asked how the audit system would be structured and who would administer it. Finn from the Myrth asked 3 quiet, precise questions about the medical relay provisions that led to an hour of detailed discussion that produced a better version of the relevant clause than the one my team had originally written. By the end of the 6th hour, 5 of the 7 representatives had signaled tentative support for the framework. The other 2, representing civilizations deep in the old council structure, had questions they could not yet answer. They did not commit, but they also did not walk out immediately. 2 of them walked out at the 4-hour mark, citing obligations to consult with their home governments. That was expected. They would face pressure from their own people when word got out, pressure that would, I suspected, ultimately push them toward the coalition rather than away from it. When the meeting ended, Owen was waiting by the shuttle in the docking bay. He handed me a cup of coffee and looked at my face. How did it go? I thought about that for a moment. 5 of 7, I said, and 1 very old arbiter who read the right clause. Owen nodded. Is 5 enough? Not yet, I said, but it is a foundation. I drank my coffee. The station hummed quietly around us, anchored at its neutral point between 3 star systems. The table was starting to take shape. The signing happened on a Tuesday. I remember that specifically, a Tuesday in October, with Auckland's sky that shade of clear blue that only happens in the southern hemisphere in early spring, when the air is cool and the light is very clean. The kind of day that feels like the world is paying attention. We had debated the location for 3 months. Keth Central Station was proposed and declined. Varath Prime was declined before the proposal was even finished. Several neutral deep space platforms were considered. And then Owen, who had grown quieter and more thoughtful in the months since the deep space meeting, made a suggestion. "What about Hiroshima?" he said. I looked at him. "The city that was leveled and rebuilt," he said. "Twice. Leveled again. Rebuilt again. The city that has spent 80 years being the place where the world goes to think about what power costs and what humanity chose to do with the cost." He held my gaze. "If you want to tell the galaxy what kind of framework this is, you bring them to Hiroshima. You let the city explain it before anyone speaks a word." Every alien delegate had been briefed in advance. Full historical context, provided by a team of historians. The choosing of Hiroshima as a venue was not explained in the briefing. It was presented as a fact, and the history was presented alongside it, and every delegate was allowed to draw their own conclusions. The ones who arrived on the morning of the signing were different from the ones who had stepped off their shuttles the night before. Something in the briefings had settled differently overnight. They had read about the city in the abstract on their transit flights. They had walked through it in the morning, before the ceremony, in small groups with local guides, and then they had come to the ceremony hall with changed faces. Clara arrived early and stood at the window of the hall for 20 minutes before taking her seat. When I found her there, she did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Your species did this to itself." "Yes," I said. "And rebuilt." "Yes." She was quiet for another moment, and chose to hold this signing here. "Owen suggested it," I said. "He was right." She turned and looked at me. "I have been a diplomat for 40 years, she said. "I have never been to a signing ceremony that made me understand the signatories before the ceremony began." She paused. "That is a very human thing to do." "Possibly," I said. The hall filled. 61 civilizations had formally joined the coalition of sovereign voices by the morning of the signing. 61, out of the 412 who had sat in the Grand Conclave when I walked out. Not a majority, but a significant one and a growing one, and one that included many of the civilizations that had been sitting at the small tables for a very long time. The old Galactic Council was still operating. It had not dissolved, and I had never asked it to. It continued in a smaller, quieter form, representing those who preferred the familiar structure. Some civilizations maintained dual membership, a hedge, a safety measure, an unwillingness to commit fully in either direction. I understood that. Change was not simple, and the beings making these decisions were responsible for the welfare of entire civilizations, not just their own positions. The coalition charter was 220 pages. Every page had been argued over. Every clause had been challenged, revised, challenged again, and refined. The audit system had been restructured 4 times based on concerns raised by different delegates. The consensus process had gone through 6 versions before the Breen Collective, who processed collective decisions very differently from individual species, proposed an elegant solution that everyone ultimately preferred to the original. It was not perfect. No document written by 61 different civilizations with 61 different histories and 61 different ideas about how power should work could ever be perfect. But it was honest, it was specific, and it had mechanisms, real ones, not aspirational language, that made its principles structurally enforceable. Finn from the Myrth had spent 2 weeks on the medical and emergency provisions alone. The language that came out of those 2 weeks was better than anything Earth's original team had written, and I had told him so. "I have seen what happens when those provisions fail," he had said simply. Salarith had served as the official observer-arbiter throughout the process. He had no vote. He held no authority over the outcome, but he had been present at every negotiating session, and twice he had quietly pointed out places where the language of the new charter inadvertently echoed the old council's management structure. Subtle phrasings, almost invisible, that could have been used to recreate the hierarchy in a different form. Both times, the delegates had caught it, reconsidered, and fixed it. I did not take a seat at the signing table. I stood to the side of the room, beside Owen, and watched. At the center of the signing table, presiding over the formal ratification, was the first chair of the Coalition of Sovereign Voices. Her name was Nora Edenval, not her given name, but the name she had chosen when she entered diplomatic service, taking the name of her civilization in the tradition of its elder delegates. She was from a species that had been classified Class II for 400 years. She was 62 years old by her civilization's reckoning, which translated to somewhere between 40 and 50 in human years. She was calm and precise, and when she spoke, she had the quality of someone who had spent a very long time being underestimated and had used that time well. When the coalition had nominated its first chair, I had declined before the nomination was formal. "Not me," I had said when Owen raised the possibility. "If I take the chair, the coalition becomes the story of what Earth did. It should be the story of what everyone built together." I had thought about it for a moment. "Nora," I had said, "she knows what it costs to be the small seat. She will remember it every day she holds the chair." Nora had accepted the nomination in a brief statement that I still thought about. She had said, "I am from a civilization that was told for 4 centuries that it was not ready to govern itself. Today, I am accepting the role of first chair of a coalition built on the principle that every civilization is always sovereign in itself. That principle is not new. What is new is that we are now writing it down in a form that is harder to quietly ignore." The signing was not dramatic. It rarely is in reality. 61 delegates, one at a time, adding their mark to a 220-page document. Each had their own signing tradition. Some pressed a physical seal, some added a biometric signature, some simply placed their hand on the page in the tradition of their species. The process took just under 2 hours. When the last signature was added, Nora looked up at the room. "The Coalition of Sovereign Voices is now formally in existence," she said. "We will restore Earth's infrastructure systems to full capacity over the next 72 hours. We will begin the open contract transition for shared systems within 30 days. She paused. "And we will hold our first full session in 6 weeks. Every voice at that table will be equal. We begin as we intend to continue." The room did not erupt. There was no celebration, no applause in the theatrical sense. What happened was quieter and more genuine, a long exhale, a sense of something vast settling into place, 100 different beings looking at each other and at the document on the table and at the city visible through the hall's windows. Owen handed me a coffee without being asked. I accepted it without taking my eyes off the room. Helen from the Keth was speaking to one of the Sarith delegates in a corner, their conversation quiet and focused. The beginning of something, I suspected. The Breen Collective was transmitting in their layered signal patterns to their home system, which, with the relay nodes now fully restored, would arrive in seconds. Finn from the Myerth was reading the final text of the medical provisions, quietly, with the expression of someone checking their work. Salarith crossed the room toward me. He was moving more slowly than he had at the deep space meeting. He had mentioned that Verath Prime's gravity suited his joints better than Earth's, but he moved with the same careful deliberateness, and his pale eyes were the same. "I have been present at 11 significant moments in galactic governance," he said, stopping beside me. "Founding documents, peace agreements, 3 treaties that ended conflicts that had lasted centuries." He looked out at the room. "I have never been present at a moment that began with one being walking out of a chamber." "It did not begin there," I said. "It began with Owen Burke, 30 years ago, reading a clause in a charter that everyone else had decided was theoretical." Salarith looked at me. "And it began with you deciding to use it." I thought about that. The shuttle from Verath Prime. Calvin's voice on the comm line. "Start the clock." The sound of my footsteps in that enormous chamber, echoing off walls that had witnessed 12,000 years of very different conversations. "I want to tell you something," Salareth said. He spoke carefully in the way of someone choosing words with long consideration. "When you invoked Clause 9 in that chamber, there were 7 delegates who understood immediately what it meant. The rest thought it was a gesture, a protest, something that would be resolved quickly." He paused. "I was one of the 7, and what I understood in that moment was not just the legal mechanism. I understood that you were not angry." I looked at him. "Anger I would have recognized," he said. "I have seen many delegates stand up in that chamber from anger, from desperation, from wounded pride. You were none of those things. You were deliberate, the way you set the seal down, the way you turned." He watched the room as he spoke. "You knew. You had planned for this, and you had planned for what came after, and the most important thing you had planned was not the withdrawal itself. It was being ready to build something when it was over." I did not say anything. "That is not a human quality," he said, "or it is not exclusively one, but it is a quality I have rarely seen exercised in a moment of crisis." He looked at me. "Most beings, when they are wronged, want the wrong acknowledged first. You wanted the better structure more than you wanted the acknowledgement." "We wanted both," I said honestly. "We just knew which one to build toward." He almost smiled. For a Verath, that was considerable. "I will return to Verath Prime tomorrow," he said. "I have a great deal of writing to do, an account of this process for the archives, a commentary on the founding charter long overdue." He looked out at the room one last time. "I hope the coalition remembers in the years to come how it started, not just the ceremony today, the morning briefings in Hiroshima, the data packet with no demands attached, the admiral in a briefing room who read the numbers and chose honesty." He looked at me. "Those moments are the real document." He inclined his head in the Verath farewell gesture and moved away through the room. Owen appeared at my shoulder. What did he want? "To say something I'll be thinking about for a while," I said. Owen nodded and looked at the room. It was dispersing slowly, delegates moving toward the exits in small groups, continuing conversations that would run for years. Clara caught my eye from across the room and nodded once. I nodded back. Outside the hall's windows, Hiroshima was going about its Tuesday. Traffic, school children in groups, the Matayasu River which had seen so much and kept moving anyway. I thought about what Gret had said to me in that briefing room on his ship before he ordered the fleet to withdraw. "You have created a crisis. Be certain you have a solution prepared." He had been right, and he had been in his own way a part of the solution, choosing honesty over procedure when the numbers made the honest path clear. I had sent him a copy of the coalition charter 3 days before the signing, with no message attached. He had responded with a single line. I read it 4 times. I had smiled at that. I thought about Priya Akafer, sitting in the monitoring room on Keth Central Station, watching the first alert appear on her screen, pouring herself a coffee, knowing exactly what it meant. She was currently working for the Coalition's Infrastructure Coordination Team, which was managing the open contract transition. She had told Owen, when he asked her how she felt about it, that she was simply glad to be doing the same work under a system that admitted who was doing it. I thought about the small table, the table by the exit, the table given to the species that wasn't supposed to matter. 11 years of sitting there and watching and learning and building, quietly, the kind of knowledge that turns out to matter more than anyone expected. Owen was looking at me. He had learned over the past year to wait out my silences. "Should we head back?" he asked after a while. "In a minute," I said. I finished my coffee. The hall was nearly empty now. The document was on the table, 220 pages, 61 signatures, representing civilizations that had never shared a table as equals before today. A young officer from our diplomatic team, a woman named Kate Aldridge, who had been with the coalition negotiating team since the 3rd month, came up to say goodbye. She was heading back to the Geneva offices to begin the infrastructure transition work. She looked energized. The way people look when they have spent a long time working towards something and have just watched it arrive. "Are you proud?" she asked me. The same question the young officer had asked on the observation deck months ago. I thought about it the same way I had then. "Proud isn't the word," I said. "We did not win anything today. We did not beat anyone. We just finally told the truth out loud and waited to see who was brave enough to agree." I looked at the document on the table. Turns out most of them were. Kate smiled and headed for the door. Owen and I were the last ones out. Outside, Hiroshima's Tuesday continued around us, ordinary and alive and rebuilt and moving forward, the way cities do, the way people do, the way the best things always do when given the chance. The coalition of sovereign voices was 6 hours old. The galaxy was already different. Not because a crisis had been resolved, not because the powerful had been made humble or the humble had been made powerful, but because somewhere in the long, patient work of the past 11 years, and in one walk across a polished floor, and in the honest reading of numbers by an admiral who preferred resolution, and in the quiet determination of 61 civilizations willing to sign their names to a better idea, something had shifted. The question had changed. Not what does each civilization need from the others. Not how do we manage the difficult ones and protect the stable ones and classify the small ones and contain the unpredictable ones. What does the galaxy need from itself? I walked out into the clean October air and thought about Owen Burke, who had spent 30 years on a clause no one else bothered to read. I thought about what he would have made of today, this ordinary Tuesday in an extraordinary city, where the answer to that question had taken its first real shape. I thought he would have been quietly, enormously satisfied. I put my hands in my pockets and walked out into the city, and the city was still there, and the river was still moving, and above us, in the blue spring sky, a galaxy full of civilizations was beginning to think about asking different questions. That was enough. That was everything.